The first thing I became aware of was the light. It was a sterile, unforgiving white, buzzing with an electric hum that seemed to vibrate behind my eyes. I blinked, and the light fractured into a dozen dancing specks against an unfamiliar ceiling, a grid of acoustic tiles stained with faint, ghostly watermarks. The smell hit me next, a clinical cocktail of antiseptic, bleach, and something vaguely metallic that coated the back of my throat. A rhythmic, insistent beeping pulsed in time with the throbbing in my head, a metronome counting down to a moment I couldn't comprehend. My body felt like a foreign country. There was a dull, aching fire in my right side, a deep tenderness that made each breath a calculated risk. But beneath that was another sensation, a deeper, more primal ache that coiled low in my belly. It was a terrifyingly familiar pressure, a tightening that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic through me. My hand, clumsy and weak, flew to my swollen abdomen. Lily. Her name was a silent scream in my mind. My daughter. Our daughter. I was 7 months pregnant, 28 weeks to be exact. Too soon. Far too soon. My eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of the pale green walls, the 4 poles standing like a silent sentinel by my bed, the tangle of wires taped to my arm. This was a hospital room. Why was I in a hospital room? Fragments of memory, sharp and jagged, began to surface. The slick, rain-washed asphalt of the road. The warm glow of the dashboard lights. Mark's laughter as he rested his hand on my knee, the sound rich and full and safe. Then another set of lights, blindingly bright, impossibly close. The horrendous screech of tires, a symphony of destruction. The world turning into a violent kaleidoscope of metal and glass. Mark. My voice was a dry, broken whisper. It scraped against my throat, tasting of dust and fear. Mark, where are you? A nurse I hadn't noticed before, a woman with kind, tired eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun, moved into my line of sight. She offered me a small, sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. Easy now, honey. You were in an accident. You need to rest. My husband, I insisted, trying to push myself up, but a fresh wave of pain from my side and a powerful clenching in my uterus sent me crashing back against the pillows. I gasped, my knuckles white as I gripped my belly. Is he okay? Where's he? I need to see him. The nurse's professional mask slipped for just a second, replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Pity? Hesitation? She just patted my hand and said, "The doctor will be in to talk to you in just a moment. Try to breathe." But I couldn't breathe. Every beep of the machine beside me felt like a nail being hammered into my coffin. The pain in my belly was no longer a dull ache. It was a tide gathering strength, pulling me under. I was alone in the wreckage of a life that only hours ago had felt so perfect, so complete. And with every tightening muscle, every wave of agony that rolled through me, I had the sickening premonition that the worst was yet to come. The door swished open and a man in a white coat, Dr. Evans according to his name tag, entered with a chart in his hand. He had a gentle demeanor, but his eyes held the weary gravity of someone who rarely delivered good news. "Sarah," he began, his voice calm and steady, a rock in my churning sea of panic. "I'm Dr. Evans. You were brought in about an hour ago. You were the driver in a 2-car collision. Do you remember what happened?" I nodded weakly. The lights, another car. Is my baby okay? It was the only question that mattered. The only thing in the universe that held any meaning. He pulled a stool over to the bedside, a sign this wouldn't be a quick conversation. "You sustained a few injuries yourself. 3 cracked ribs and some significant internal bruising. You also have a mild concussion, which is why you're feeling disoriented. But our primary concern right now is the baby." He paused, and in that pause my world began to tilt on its axis. "Sarah, the trauma from the impact has sent you into preterm labor." The words hung in the air, monstrous and unreal. Preterm labor. I'd read about it in the pregnancy books, filed it away in the things that happen to other people category. It couldn't be happening to me. To us. "No," I whispered, shaking my head as if I could physically dislodge his words. "No, it's too early. She's not ready." "I know," he said softly. 28 weeks is very early. Her lungs are not yet fully developed. We are doing everything we can to stop the contractions. We've started you on a magnesium sulfate drip, which should help relax the uterus. We've also given you the first of 2 steroid injections to help speed up Lily's lung development, just in case. Just in case. 2 words that held a universe of terror. He was speaking a language of medical procedure, of protocol and contingency plans. All I could hear was that my baby, my tiny perfect daughter who I had only ever seen in grainy black and white ultrasounds, was in danger. And my body, the very vessel that was meant to be her safe haven, had become the source of that danger. But you can stop it, right? I pleaded, my voice cracking. The contractions, you can make them stop? We're trying, Sarah. That's our number 1 priority, he said, but his eyes didn't give me the unequivocal yes my soul was screaming for. As he continued to explain the risks and procedures, my mind latched onto one glaring omission. Where is Mark? I asked again, my voice stronger this time, laced with an edge of desperation. He was in the car with me. Did you talk to him? Is he hurt? Why isn't he here? He would never leave me alone right now. Never. Dr. Evans's gaze flickered towards the nurse, Carol, who had stepped back into the room. A silent, heavy communication passed between them. It was Carol who finally spoke, her voice laced with a practiced, gentle sorrow. Sarah, Mark is okay, she said, moving to my side and taking my hand. Her skin was warm and dry against my cold, clammy one. He was brought in with you. He was checked out in the ER. He's fine. Just a few cuts and bruises. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me sick. He was okay. Thank God. But the relief was immediately chased by a cold, sharp confusion. Okay? If he's okay, then why isn't he here? Why hasn't he come to see me? He should be here, holding my hand, telling me it's all going to be okay. Carol's grip on my hand tightened. She looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face, and her eyes were filled with a deep, profound pity that scared me more than anything else. Honey, she began, and the careful way she said the word made the hair on my arms stand up. Mark. He wasn't alone in the car with you. I stared at her, uncomprehending. What are you talking about? Of course he was. We were coming home from our birthing class. The memory was so clear, so vibrant it felt like I could reach out and touch it. The 2 of us in our beat-up sedan, the night air cool and damp. Mark was doing a terrible impression of a sports announcer, giving a play-by-play of the diaper-changing demonstration we'd just seen. I was laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes, one hand on my belly, feeling Lily kick in response to the vibrations of my laughter. He reached over and placed his hand over mine, his thumb stroking my skin. The streetlights painted fleeting stripes of gold across his face as he turned to me, his expression softening. You know, he'd said, his voice dropping to that low, sincere tone that always made my heart flutter. I was so scared when you first told me you were pregnant. But no. I can't imagine my life any other way. It's always gonna be you and me and Lily. Our little team. I had leaned over to kiss him, my heart so full of love and hope for our future it felt like it would burst. That was the last thing I remembered before the blinding headlights, the shriek of metal, and the world shattering into darkness. We were alone, I insisted to the nurse, my voice trembling as I clung to the memory. Just the 2 of us. Carol's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Sarah, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Paramedics found 3 people in your car. You, Mark, and another woman. She was in the passenger seat. The sterile white room fell away. The beeping of the monitor faded into a dull, distant thrum. The passenger seat. I had been driving. Mark was in the passenger seat. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of an equation that had no solution. If Mark was in the passenger seat, then where was I? No, that wasn't right. I was driving. He was next to me. Oh. A cold, horrifying realization began to dawn, a truth so ugly and impossible my mind fought to reject it. I hadn't been driving home from the birthing class. Mark had picked me up from my book club meeting. He was driving. I was in the passenger seat. So the woman. She's his co-worker, Carol supplied gently, as if reading the frantic, desperate denial in my eyes. He told the paramedics they were on their way to a conference. An emergency work trip. But there was no conference. There was no work trip. There was only the image, now burned into my brain, of my husband, the man who had promised me a forever filled with love and family, in a car with another woman. The accident hadn't just broken my ribs and threatened my child. It had ripped the curtain back on a lie I never knew I was living. The betrayal was a physical thing, a shard of ice that pierced through the center of my chest, colder and sharper than any broken bone. He wasn't here by my side because he was with her. He had chosen her. Even now, as his wife and unborn child lay broken in a hospital bed, he was choosing her. And then, as if to punctuate the utter devastation of that thought, another contraction seized me. It was stronger this time, a brutal, crushing wave that stole my breath and tore a raw cry from my throat. This pain was different. It was no longer just the physical agony of a body in crisis. It was intertwined with the soul-shattering pain of a broken heart, a shattered life. Each spasm felt like my body was trying to expel not just my baby, but every promise, every dream, every happy memory I had ever shared with Mark. I felt the end with every contraction. The end of my marriage. The end of my trust. The end of the world I had so carefully, so lovingly built. And in that moment, alone in the stark white room, I was terrifyingly certain it was also the end of hope. The world after that revelation was a muffled, distant place. Nurse Carol's kind words, Dr. Evans's medical explanations, they all became a dull drone, the sound of adults talking in a cartoon. My reality had shrunk to the size of the hospital bed, to the twin agonies that were ripping me apart from the inside out. One was the relentless, tightening vice of the contractions. The other was the cold, jagged hole where my heart used to be. Why? My marriage, my future, the man I had trusted with my entire soul. It had all been a lie. Carol eventually had to leave her shift over. She squeezed my hand and promised to check on me in the morning, her eyes full of a sorrow that felt real, a small pinprick of light in an encroaching darkness. She was replaced by a younger, briskly efficient night nurse who checked my 4 and the baby's monitor with a professional detachment that underscored my profound isolation. I was no longer a person. I was a patient, a collection of vital signs and problematic symptoms. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. Night fell outside my window, but the artificial twilight of the hospital room was eternal. Every time I drifted towards the hazy edge of sleep, a contraction would drag me back, a brutal reminder that there was no escape. The magnesium drip made me feel flushed and weak, a sick, heavy feeling that settled deep in my bones, but it did little to dull the sharp edges of the pain. In the suffocating quiet, the sounds from the hallway became a form of torture. I heard a man's low, soothing voice telling someone on the phone, "Yeah, she's a trooper. And the little guy is perfect." I heard the cheerful squeak of a baby bassinet being wheeled past my door. I heard laughter. It all felt like it was happening in another universe, a world I had been violently ejected from. My universe was this bed, this pain, and the crushing weight of Mark's absence. His non-presence was a physical entity in the room, a ghost that sat in the visitor's chair and mocked me with everything we were supposed to have been. Sometime after midnight, my phone, which a nurse had retrieved from a plastic bag of my belongings, buzzed on the bedside table. My heart leaped with a pathetic, traitorous flutter of hope. "He's sorry. It was a mistake. He's coming." I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy. It was a text from him. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. The message wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a demolition. "I know this is a mess. Things are complicated. I can't talk right now, I have to handle this. Don't call me. And please don't call my parents. I'll deal with them." I read it once. Then twice. 10 times. There was no love, no concern, no question about me or the baby. Just cold, selfish damage control. "Things are complicated. I have to handle this." He had already reframed the narrative. Our baby's potential fight for life was a mess he had to handle. And the final sentence was the cruelest cut of all. "Don't call my parents." He was severing my lifelines. His parents loved me. They were ecstatic about becoming grandparents. He was isolating me, ensuring I couldn't expose him, boxing me into this nightmare alone. It was an act of breathtaking cruelty, an emotional violence that left me gasping for air more than any contraction. A new kind of fear, cold and practical, began to seep into the cracks of my broken heart. My own parents were thousands of miles away, retired and living on a fixed income. Mark and I, were supposed to be a team. He handled the finances. I was a freelance graphic designer and my income was sporadic. My hands shaking, I navigated to my mobile banking app, a knot of pure dread tightening in my stomach. I opened the app for our joint checking account, the one where we kept all our savings for the baby. The balance displayed on the screen was $78.14. I blinked, thinking it was a mistake, a glitch. I refreshed the page. $78.14. I scrolled down to the transaction history. An hour ago, while I was being monitored and prepped, there had been a wire transfer. A transfer of $10,000. Our entire savings, the money for the crib, the car seat, the hospital bills, to an account I didn't recognize. He had emptied it. He hadn't just left me. He had stripped me bare, taking everything we had built and leaving me with nothing but the consequences. The beep of the fetal heart monitor suddenly changed its rhythm, becoming faster, more erratic. A second later, the night nurse was in the room, her eyes fixed on the screen. "The baby's heart rate is dropping with the contractions," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm paging Dr. Evans." Everything became a blur of hurried activity. The doctor appeared, his face etched with concern. He looked at the paper spooling from the monitor, a frantic, jagged line that looked like a seismograph reading of my world falling apart. "The decelerations are getting worse, Sarah," he said, his voice low and serious. "The contractions are putting too much stress on her. The magnesium isn't stopping the labor, and I'm worried that the placenta might have been damaged in the accident." He laid a hand on my arm, forcing me to meet his gaze. "We have a difficult decision to make. We can continue to try and wait, give the steroids more time to work on her lungs, but every major contraction risks her oxygen supply. Or we can perform an emergency C-section now. It will get her out of that stressful environment, but she will be extremely premature. She will face a long uphill battle in the NICU." He was asking me to make a choice. A choice between two terrifying, impossible options. And I had to make it alone. The man who was supposed to be my partner in this, my co-parent, the other half of our team, was gone. He was a thief in the night who had stolen our future and left me in the rubble to make a life-or-death decision for a child he had already abandoned. Another contraction ripped through me, more powerful than any before. I cried out, clutching my belly as I watched the horrifying dip on the heart monitor. It was in that moment, staring at that jagged line that represented my daughter's faltering heartbeat, that I understood. The end I had been feeling wasn't just about my marriage or my heart. It was a real, tangible threat. With every wave of pain, I was feeling the potential end of my daughter's life before it had even begun. There, in the silent, terrifying space between the doctor's question and my answer, the world fell away. The ghost of Mark, the sting of the stolen money, the sterile white walls of the hospital, it all dissolved. The only thing that existed was the frantic, desperate line on the monitor that was my daughter's voice, screaming for help in the only language she had. She was a fighter. She was telling me what she needed. My job was to listen. A strange, preternatural calm washed over me. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I was her mother. My body might be failing her, my heart might be broken, but my will was forged from something stronger. "Get her out," I said, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the tears and terror that had choked me moments before. "Do the C-section. Please just save my baby." That was it. The decision was made. And with it, a shift occurred deep within me. I was no longer a victim being tossed on the waves of tragedy. I was the captain of a sinking ship, and I would burn it to the waterline to save my only passenger. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. My bed was unlocked and pushed at a near run through the corridors. The ceiling tiles became white streaks above me. Voices, calm but urgent, exchanged medical terms I didn't understand. I was a package being delivered to the operating room, a passive observer to the frantic efforts to save my child. I felt a primal, animalistic fear. I was alone, heading into surgery, about to have my body cut open, and the one person who had promised to hold my hand through it all was a ghost, a thief who had vanished into the night. The operating room was colder and brighter than I could have imagined. It smelled of steel and iodine. A dozen figures in blue scrubs and masks moved with purpose around me. An anesthesiologist with kind eyes behind his glasses spoke gently to me, explaining the spinal block, telling me I'd feel pressure but no pain. As he administered the injection and a wave of profound numbness began to creep up my body, a blue curtain was raised in front of my face, separating me from the work they were about to do. I was on one side, a terrified head and heart. On the other was the fate of my daughter. Tears I didn't know I had left began to slide from the corners of my eyes into my hair. My hands, which lay useless at my sides, trembled. This was the loneliest moment of my life. Then a warm hand closed over mine. I turned my head and saw a nurse I hadn't met before. Her name tag read Maria. Her eyes, above her mask, were dark and full of a fierce compassion. "You're doing great, Sarah," she whispered, her voice a lifeline in the sterile sea. "You're the strongest person in this room right now. You are her champion. You just breathe and you let us do our work. We've got you. We've got her." Her words, that simple act of human connection, anchored me. She didn't let go of my hand. She stayed there, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on my skin as the surgeon's voice announced, "Okay, we're starting now." I felt the strange, detached sensations of pressure and pulling. I focused on Maria's hand, on the rhythmic beep of my own heart monitor, and I prayed. I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I prayed to the universe. I begged and pleaded and bargained with every fiber of my being. Let her cry. Please just let me hear her cry. Time warped, stretching into an unbearable eternity. Then through the sterile air the surgeon's voice cut through. "Okay, baby is out. Time of birth, 3:17 a.m. And then, silence. A vast, echoing, soul-destroying silence. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. My heart stopped. My lungs seized. The world ceased to exist. In that crushing void I understood the true meaning of the end. This was it. I had failed. "Please," my mind screamed, a silent, desperate wail. "Please, Lily, please make a sound." A flurry of activity was happening on the other side of the curtain. I could hear hushed, urgent voices. A sound of suctioning. Then, after an agony that felt like 1,000 years, I heard it. It wasn't a cry, not at first. It was a tiny, sputtering cough. A gasp. And then, a sound so thin and reedy it was almost lost in the vastness of the room, but to me it was a symphony. A furious, indignant little cry. It was the sound of defiance. The sound of life. A sob tore itself from my chest, a raw, ragged sound of a dam breaking. Tears of relief, of grief, of a love so powerful it was physically painful, streamed down my face. Maria squeezed my hand. "You hear that, champion? That's your daughter. She's a fighter just like her mom." A doctor briefly brought her around the curtain for me to see. She was impossibly small, red and wrinkled, covered in a waxy white film. Her face was scrunched in a furious expression, and she looked less like a baby and more like a tiny, angry alien. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. They placed her cheek against mine for a single, fleeting second. Her skin was impossibly soft. Then she was gone, whisked away in a clear plastic box, on her way to the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU. On her way to the fight of her life. The weeks that followed were lived in 3-hour increments, measured by the whir of a breast pump and the beeping of machines. My recovery from the C-section was a painful, hazy ordeal, but every ounce of my being was focused on the third-floor NICU. The first time I was wheeled in to see her, I nearly fell apart. There, in a clear plastic isolette, lay my daughter. She weighed 2 pounds 11 ounces. Her skin was so thin it was translucent, a delicate road map of veins visible beneath. She was hooked up to a constellation of wires, monitoring her heart, her breathing, her oxygen levels. A feeding tube ran through her nose, and the ventilator breathed for her, the rhythmic puff of the machine a constant reminder of how fragile her hold on life was. My world shrank to the size of that isolette. I spent 10, 12, 14 hours a day in a rocking chair by her side, my hand resting gently on her tiny back through a porthole in the plastic. I couldn't hold her yet, but I could be there. I read her children's books, my voice a low murmur against the backdrop of the machines. I told her about the world outside, about the color of the sky and the feel of grass and the sound of the ocean. I told her about the nursery that was waiting for her, even though the thought of our apartment, of Mark's things still there, sent a pang of sickness through me. But something remarkable happened in that quiet, sterile room. As I watched Lily fight, I began to find my own fight. Every time she overcame an obstacle, every time she fought off an infection, every time her oxygen levels stabilized, every time she gained a precious gram of weight, it was a victory for us both. The identity of the broken, betrayed wife began to flake away, replaced by something new, something fierce and unyielding. I was Lily's mother. My purpose was singular and absolute. The ghost of Mark faded with each passing day. His betrayal, once an all-consuming agony, was now a dull, distant ache. It had been the catalyst, the earthquake that leveled my life, but it was no longer the story. The story was here in this room. The story was in the fierce grip of Lily's tiny hand around my finger. I started to rebuild. I made the call I had been dreading and told my parents everything. There was no judgment, only love and an immediate promise of help. They couldn't be there physically right away, but they were my emotional rock. I contacted a legal aid society, and a kind, determined lawyer began the process of filing for divorce and fighting for what Mark had stolen. I met with the hospital's social worker, a woman named Linda who became my quiet champion, connecting me with support groups, government aid programs and resources for single mothers facing homelessness. For the first time, I didn't feel entirely alone. I had a new team. A team of women. The day I finally got to hold her is a memory burned into my soul. The nurses carefully arranged the wires and tubes and placed my tiny 2-pound daughter on my bare chest. The practice, they called it kangaroo care. I called it a miracle. The feeling of her fragile, warm body against my skin, the faint scent of her hair, the hummingbird beat of her heart against mine. It was in that moment that I truly understood. The pain of the contractions hadn't been the end. The C-section wasn't just a surgery. It was all a birth. Not just Lily's but mine. A new version of me was born in that hospital. A mother. After 67 days in the NICU, the day came. Lily, now a healthy, thriving 5-pound baby, was discharged. As I buckled her into a car seat that looked enormous around her, my hands didn't shake. As I walked out of the hospital doors and into the bright, overwhelming sunshine, I didn't feel fear. I felt a profound, unshakable strength. I wasn't going back to the apartment I had shared with Mark. I was going to a small, temporary place secured by a local charity Linda had found. I had a little over $100 to my name after some emergency funds came through. The future was a vast, terrifying unknown. It would be hard. There would be struggles I couldn't yet imagine. But as I looked down at the beautiful, perfect face of the daughter I had almost lost, who had fought so hard to be here, I knew with absolute certainty that we would be okay. My life had been torn down to its very foundation, but from the rubble I was building something new, something stronger and more real than anything I'd had before. The excruciating pain of every contraction had felt like the end of my world. I had been so wrong. It wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of everything that truly mattered. It was the painful, beautiful, and glorious beginning of us. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a moment that felt like the end only to find it was a new beginning, please share your story in the comments below. Your journey matters and your voice deserves to be heard. The darkest moments often lead to our brightest transformations, and there is incredible power in sharing that hope. Don't forget to give this a like to help it reach others who might need to hear this message of resilience. And please subscribe for more stories of survival, strength, and the incredible power of the human spirit. You are not alone.